What happens when America's most talked about former royal sits down with one of television's most respected journalists, only to have the interview spiral into a heated confrontation that ends with security being called? Today, we're diving into the explosive clash between Meghan Markle and Gayle King that left CBS executives scrambling and viewers witnessing one of the most dramatic moments in morning television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think really happened here, because trust me, you're going to want to discuss this one. The CBS morning studio had that familiar buzz of controlled chaos that comes with live television. Cameras positioned at precise angles, lighting adjusted to perfection, and the signature orange and blue backdrop that millions of Americans had come to associate with their morning routine. Gayle King sat in her usual spot, papers neatly arranged in front of her, exuding the calm confidence that had made her one of the most trusted voices in broadcast journalism. Across from her, Meghan Markle settled into the guest chair, her posture straight and composed, wearing a crisp navy blazer that seemed carefully chosen to project both authority and accessibility. The former Duchess had agreed to this interview to promote her latest philanthropic initiative, but anyone who knew anything about live television could sense the underlying tension. This wasn't just another promotional spot, this was Meghan Markle facing questions from someone who wasn't going to handle her with kid gloves. Gayle opened with her trademark warm smile, the kind that had put countless guests at ease over the years. Meghan, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I know you're passionate about your new project, but I think our viewers are curious about something else entirely. There's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with the royal family, and frankly, some people are saying you've been less than truthful about your experiences. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. Gayle, I appreciate you having me on, but I have to say, I'm a bit surprised by that characterization. Everything I've shared about my experiences has been my truth, and I stand by every word. Your truth, Gayle repeated, leaning forward slightly. That's an interesting phrase, Meghan, because truth is generally considered to be universal, not personal. When you told Oprah that you were married 3 days before the public ceremony, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself contradicted that claim. How do you reconcile that? Meghan's fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair, but her composure remained intact. Gayle, with all due respect, you weren't there. The Archbishop wasn't privy to every private moment between Harry and myself. What we shared with Oprah was deeply personal and meaningful to us. But it was also factually incorrect, Gayle pressed, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. And that's not the only instance. You claimed in that same interview that you were never given media training, yet palace sources have confirmed that you received extensive briefings. Are you saying those sources are lying? The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Camera operators exchanged glances, and the production crew could sense this was veering into uncharted territory. Meghan shifted in her seat, her carefully maintained composure beginning to show cracks. I find it interesting, Gayle, that you're so quick to believe anonymous palace sources over a woman who lived through these experiences, Meghan said, her voice carrying a slight edge. These are the same sources that have spent years trying to undermine my credibility and my character. Gayle wasn't backing down. I'm not trying to undermine anyone, Meghan. I'm trying to understand how we got to a place where there are such dramatically different versions of events. When you say you felt suicidal and that you were denied help, that's an incredibly serious allegation. But multiple former palace employees have said there were mental health resources available that you never accessed. Multiple former palace employees, Meghan repeated, her tone growing sharper. You mean the same employees who were part of a system that failed to protect me? The same people who stood by while I was being torn apart in the British press? Forgive me if I don't put much stock in their version of events. The interview was clearly heading in a direction that neither woman had anticipated. Gayle's questions were becoming more pointed, and Meghan's responses were growing more defensive. The friendly promotional chat had transformed into something far more confrontational. Let's talk about the Oprah interview itself, Gayle continued, clearly prepared to dig deeper. You made some very specific claims about conversations with members of the royal family, particularly regarding concerns about your son's skin color. But you've been notably vague about who exactly said what. Don't you think the public deserves more clarity on such a serious accusation? Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like anger. The public deserves honesty. Gayle, which is exactly what they got. Harry and I made the decision to protect certain family members by not naming names. But that doesn't make our experience any less valid or real. Protecting family members, Gayle said, her tone remaining professional but pointed, or protecting yourself from having to provide specifics that might be challenged because without details, without context, these allegations hang over the entire royal family like a cloud. Are you seriously suggesting that I made up racist comments for sympathy? Meghan asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. That I would lie about something so fundamental to my family's safety and well-being? The studio had gone, completely silent, except for the low hum of cameras and the barely audible voices of the production crew speaking into their headsets. This was no longer a standard morning show interview. It was becoming a confrontation that would be dissected and analyzed for weeks to come. Gayle maintained her professional demeanor, but there was steel in her voice. I'm not suggesting you made anything up, Meghan. I'm asking for the kind of accountability that any public figure should expect when they make serious allegations. You've built a platform on speaking your truth, but truth requires evidence, context, and consistency. Evidence? Meghan's voice was now clearly strained. What kind of evidence would satisfy you, Gayle? Should I have recorded private family conversations? Should I have documented every slight, every microaggression, every moment when I felt unwelcome in my own family? The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most dramatic interviews in recent television history. Neither woman was backing down, and the collision course they were on showed no signs of changing direction. Gayle leaned back slightly, her journalist's instincts fully engaged now. Meghan, nobody's asking you to have recorded conversations, but when you make public statements that directly contradict documented facts, people are going to ask questions. That's how journalism works. That's how accountability works. Accountability, Meghan repeated, her voice taking on a bitter edge. That's rich, coming from someone who works for the same network that's given platforms to people who've spent years attacking me. Where was the accountability when your colleagues were repeating tabloid lies without fact-checking them? The accusation hung heavy in the studio air. Gayle's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. CBS News has always maintained the highest journalistic standards. Meghan, we report facts, we verify sources, and we ask tough questions of everyone, regardless of their status or position. That includes you. Tough questions, Meghan said, with a laugh that contained no humor. Is that what you call repeating palace talking points? Because that's exactly what this feels like, Gayle. You're not asking tough questions. You're conducting a cross-examination based on information fed to you by the same institution that tried to destroy my mental health. The production team was now visibly tense. Several crew members had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The show's director was speaking rapidly into his headset, clearly trying to decide whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Gayle's professionalism was being tested in real time, but she refused to be rattled. Meghan, I understand. You're upset, but these aren't palace talking points. These are questions based on documented inconsistencies in your public statements. When you claim you knew nothing about royal protocol, yet you studied at Northwestern and worked as an actress for years, understanding protocol and public presentation, people are going to question that. So now you're questioning my intelligence? Meghan shot back, her composure finally beginning to crack in earnest. You're suggesting that because I went to college and worked in entertainment, I should have automatically understood centuries-old British royal traditions. That's not just unfair, Gayle. It's insulting. I'm not questioning your intelligence, I'm questioning your credibility, Gayle replied, her words precise and deliberate. There's a difference, and it's an important one. You've positioned yourself as a victim of circumstances beyond your control, but many of the situations you've described don't align with the documented record. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent space. Documented record, according to whom? The same people who leaked stories about me to the press, the same people who briefed against me while I was pregnant. You're taking their word over mine, and frankly, I expected better from you." Gayle remained seated, her voice calm but firm. "Meghan, please sit down. We're having a conversation here, not a confrontation. I'm taking nobody's word over anyone else's. I'm asking for clarification on statements you've made publicly. This stopped being a conversation the moment you decided to ambush me with tabloid talking points," Meghan said, still standing. "You invited me here to discuss my charitable work, and instead you're conducting some kind of trial where I'm apparently guilty until proven innocent." The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost tangible. Camera operators continued filming, but several were looking toward the director for guidance. This was uncharted territory for a morning show format, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Gayle finally stood as well, but her movements were measured and calm. "Meghan, nobody ambushed you. These are legitimate questions that have been raised by your own public statements. If you can't handle being asked about inconsistencies in your story, maybe you shouldn't be making these claims in public forums." I can't handle it." Meghan's voice rose to a level that was clearly audible throughout the studio. "Gayle, I've handled more scrutiny and harassment than most people could imagine. I've had my character assassinated in the press, my family relationships destroyed, and my mental health pushed to the breaking point. What I can't handle is sitting here while someone I thought I could trust parrots the same lies that have been used to torment me." "Nobody's tormenting you, Meghan," Gayle replied, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm doing my job, which is asking questions that our viewers want answered. You came on this show knowing full well that we'd discussed your public statements and your ongoing situation with the royal family." "Your viewers," Meghan said with obvious disdain. "You mean the same viewers who've been fed a steady diet of negative coverage about me for years, the same people who've been conditioned to see me as the villain in this story, regardless of what actually happened." Gayle's expression shifted, and for the first time, her professional mask seemed to slip slightly. "Meghan, you're being unfair, and you know it. Our viewers are intelligent people who can form their own opinions when presented with facts. What they can't do is make informed decisions when they're given incomplete or contradictory information." "Incomplete information," Meghan repeated, shaking her head. "You want complete information? Here's some complete information for you, Gayle. I came into that family with nothing but good intentions. I wanted to serve. I wanted to make a difference. And I was systematically undermined and sabotaged by people who saw me as a threat to their established order, and yet," Gayle countered, "multiple people who worked with you during that time have painted a very different picture. They've described someone who is difficult to work with, demanding, and unwilling to follow established protocols. How do you explain that?" Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. "Multiple people who were never named, never went on record, and conveniently shared their stories only after Harry and I decided to leave. How convenient that these sources only found their voices when it served the palace's narrative." The confrontation was escalating beyond anything either woman had anticipated. What had started as a standard interview had become a full-scale verbal battle, with neither participant willing to back down. The studio crew was now openly staring, and several producers had gathered near the director, clearly debating whether to cut to commercial or let the drama continue. Gayle took a step closer to Meghan, her voice dropping but her intensity increasing. "Meghan, you can't have it both ways. You can't demand privacy and then make explosive public allegations. You can't claim you want to move on while continuing to relitigate the past in interviews and documentaries. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices." "Take responsibility?" Meghan's voice was now trembling with barely controlled anger. "I take responsibility every single day for the choice to speak my truth. Gayle, what I won't take responsibility for is other people's racism, their inability to accept change, and their need to destroy anyone who threatens their comfortable status quo." The word racism hit the studio like a lightning bolt. Gayle's composure, which had remained remarkably steady throughout the increasingly heated exchange, finally showed signs of cracking. Her voice became sharper, more pointed than anyone had ever heard on morning television. "Don't you dare," Gayle said, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Don't you dare stand there and suggest that legitimate questions about your credibility are somehow rooted in racism. That's exactly the kind of deflection that makes people question your honesty in the first place. Meghan's face flushed with anger, her hands clenched at her sides. Deflection? Gayle? You've spent the last 15 minutes systematically dismantling every aspect of my experience, taking the word of anonymous sources over someone who lived through it. If that's not rooted in bias, then what is it? It's called journalism, Gayle shot back, her own voice rising for the first time. It's called holding public figures accountable for their statements. You don't get to cry racism every time someone asks you tough questions, Meghan. That diminishes real instances of discrimination, and frankly, it's beneath you. The studio had gone completely silent, except for the mechanical hum of cameras and equipment. Even the production crew had stopped, moving transfixed by the verbal warfare unfolding before them. This was no longer an interview. It was a full-scale confrontation between two strong-willed women who had reached an impasse. Meghan took a step toward Gayle, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Beneath me? What's beneath me, Gayle? Is sitting here while someone I thought was an ally repeats the same character assassination that's been going on for years. You're supposed to be better than this. I am being better than this, Gayle replied, standing her ground. I'm treating you like any other public figure who makes serious allegations without providing adequate support for their claims. That's equality, Meghan, not racism. Adequate support, Meghan repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What would constitute adequate support for you, Gayle? Video evidence of private conversations, sworn affidavits from people who were in the room. Or would you just find new ways to question that evidence too? Gayle's patience had clearly reached its limit. What I'd like is consistency, Meghan. I'd like your story to remain the same from interview to interview. I'd like your claims to align with documented facts. And I'd like you to stop hiding behind accusations of racism when people point out legitimate inconsistencies. That was the final straw. Meghan's composure shattered completely, her voice rising to a level that made several crew members step back instinctively. Hiding behind racism? Are you out of your mind? I lived through years of racist coverage in the British press, Gayle. I endured comments about my child's skin color from members of my own family. I was driven to the point of suicidal thoughts by the systematic campaign against me. And you're standing there suggesting I'm making it up for sympathy? I'm not suggesting you made anything up, Gayle replied, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I'm asking for specifics, for context, for the kind of details that would allow people to understand what really happened. What really happened? Meghan's voice cracked with emotion and fury. What really happened is that I trusted people like you to tell my story fairly, and instead, you've chosen to side with the very institution that tried to destroy me. You're no different from the rest of them, Gayle. You're just better at hiding it. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Gayle's face showed a mixture of shock and anger that her viewers had never seen before. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was ice cold. That's a oath, Meghan. You're way out of line here. I've given you every opportunity to explain yourself, to provide context for your claims, and instead, you've chosen to attack my integrity and my professionalism. If you can't handle being held